Welcome back to Deceptive Methods, the podcast where we discuss historical conspiracies and try to do 2 episodes a year at this point.
On average. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm Amanda.
And I'm Jesse. Every once in a while, when we do this show, Amanda will take me through a historical conspiracy that I have generally no idea what's coming until at some point I go, oh shit, Eureka, it's this.
And I've actually had this episode written for a while, like actually a really long time, but sometimes it's hard to just, for me personally, I know a lot of people that have like the same type of brain as I do, that it's called like executive function, and you just, even though you know you have to do it and it's ready to go, like you just can't take that step. So I really struggle with that, but I've actually had this episode written probably for like 3 months.
Oh my goodness.
And we just haven't found a time to do it. And also I haven't been able to take that step. So hopefully I remember what I was talking about when I go through all of this. And I know how much you love royal
They
content.
are my favorite. I was devastated when the Queen died.
Oh, I know. Like, we watched the funeral procession and
Yeah,
you
I
were
was
crying.
There were tears everywhere.
You actually gave me a look when I said I wanted to watch it. You were like, okay. And I was like, shut up. Don't like make fun of me for liking things.
Okay, it wasn't judging as in, how dare you watch something like this. It was just more like why do you want to watch it?
But I wanted to watch it because I don't have like a super amount of love for the royal family, but I do have...
You're interested.
I have a strong interest in English history. Like, I feel like most of my degree focused on English history. So in turn, I also have interest in the monarchy, but not that like I believe it should be there, but just as a historical aspect.
It's an interesting thing to watch from afar and not actually cry when they die.
I'm not like gonna die. I'm not gonna die because she cried. Our recent royal family that we have right now, and in particular parts of how Elizabeth became the queen. Which sometimes I don't think a lot of people really know, and it's not about that, but it's kind of about that.
It's in there,
a byproduct. So, did you know that in 1939,
yes.
Of course you do, the newly abdicated King Edward VIII was kind of like an honorary Nazi?
I mean, it makes sense. A lot of people kind of were back then.
It's like common knowledge. But Edward wasn't just a sympathizer. He was courted for something much more severe, which was the plan to depose the current monarchy and insert himself as a puppet king for fascist rule by Germany.
I just killed the puppet king in Lies of P.
Kind of the same thing.
Probably not. I mean, that guy was like really tough and not some, little German ancestry, European, United Kingdom dork.
Yeah, by way of Japan. The whole game. Oh, wait.
Korea.
Oh, it was Korean?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
South Korean game. There's a thriving industry there.
And it turns out that the abdicated king was involved in numerous scandals, schemes, and sometimes treasons, or at least close to it. So he had a lot going on.
Jeez.
However, this might not always have been his intention or even his understanding of what was going on. Often his scandals and near treasons were connected to his wife, who was called That American Woman, as she was known by his family, and her real name was Wallis Simpson.
Well, when it comes to, if you want to sympathize with Nazis, go with America back then.
Yeah.
The Nazis loved our history, and we were really big fans of them early on.
Yeah, and they were big fans of her.
Look up the Nazi American summer camps.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe we should do an episode on that.
Just how much they loved Alexander Hamilton. The Nazis, I mean.
Yeah, that was...
we try to not teach history here because it's really bad if you actually look into it.
Yeah, once you look into another subject and then it relates to another subject, and then it's just so easy to go down a rabbit hole because everything is just...
And it's never a good rabbit hole. Never.
It's fun, though.
Sometimes it can be good, but there's so much that's just not.
The royal family was no stranger to German ways. In fact, the British royal family is German in lineage. From Queen Victoria, the royal name was Saxe-Coburg-Gotha. which
Oh.
was imported by her cousin, Prince Albert, when Victoria decided to take the Gotha name. So she was the queen and changed her name to her husband's name,
That's weird.
which was scandalous.
Yeah.
But there wasn't that much difference because Victoria was a Saxe-Coburg Saalfeld,
Oh, okay. Yeah.
and Albert was a Saxe-Coburg Gotha.
In a can.
And we learned before that the German royalty was just out of control. Like so many princes and it was just out of control. Like with Catherine the Great, it's not even really a big deal to like be a royal family in Germany.
Yeah. Germans they're A-okay with their sex.
They're what?
They like having sex.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. They're A-okay with it. They're not prudes. That's one thing with America where we were founded by prudes who thought that, Britain was too wild. And yeah, so.
I know. Great for us. The royal family dropped all their German titles and their house name was changed by King George V to Windsor in 1917 during World War I to appear less German when a German bomber plane called the Gotha G4 began flying across the Channel and bombing London.
Okay.
The House of Windsor name is derived from the ancient Windsor Castle built in the 11th century by William the Conqueror and is the longest occupied castle in Europe. So they're just like, how about Windsor?
Yeah, we'll just choose that. Why not?
Yeah. Elizabeth II of Windsor became queen because her uncle abdicated, this Edward. But I think that she might have ended up becoming queen anyway because Wallace and Edward never had children. And if they didn't have kids, then she would have still become queen in the end.
Yeah.
So
Once they were done, it just would have gone to her by default.
right. Or again, maybe not if England had become a Nazi state.
Oh, true.
Speculative history is a fascinating subject to me. Like I love learning about possible timelines and histories and things that could have happened if like one decision had changed. So if Edward had actually been set up as a puppet Nazi king of England, then what would have happened?
It would have been a very, very different, because I mean they were France, like they were the main ones fighting them eventually.
Yeah.
We really didn't get in until it was pretty late in.
Yeah,
So
France was deep in it. They were completely occupied, but England never let themselves get occupied. So that was...
yeah, and then like it was mostly Russia just tossing bodies at them nonstop, losing hundreds of millions of people over the decades because of Stalin, and then just saying, you must serve, and if you don't go out there knowing you're going to die, we'll shoot you in the head anyway. It's like, not a time I would want to have been alive.
Yeah, it seems, I don't even know. It just seems like a horrible time for the entire world.
Mm-hmm.
So who was this abdicated King Edward VIII? You might ask.
I did. I asked in my head.
Edward Albert Christian George Andrew Patrick David Windsor.
Oh my God.
Known to friends and family as David, but to us as Edward, was born June 23rd, 1894. Because they have to honor like 15 family members whenever
Stupid.
They're like, okay, the first kid, he had 6 names for these 6 people, so the next one has to have 8 names for these 8 people.
Yeah, that's like the Dumbledore name in Harry Potter, where it's just super long because dumb
you
traditions.
Have to name everybody after everybody. He was born to the future King George V and Queen Mary during the reign of his great-grandmother, Queen Victoria. George V is the one that is basically a twin to his cousin, Tsar Nicholas of Russia. Like, if you look it up, it's crazy.
Oh, they look exactly
yeah,
the same.
they look like twins. And so Tsar Nicholas was the one that was killed during the Bolshevik Revolution, and who George V denied his request for asylum in England because it would be politically inappropriate to have 2 monarchs living in one country, which will come up again later.
God.
So they said, can you please take us in for asylum, the Tsar family?
No, I can't. You must die because of decorum.
Yeah, and I think that he wanted to, but his wife said, we can't do that. I don't know. It was pretty wild.
He'll try and take over the country if we let him in.
But having 2 monarchs in the same country, how do you handle that?
Who cares? They're
care.
just regular people.
They care.
God, it's what always kills me is because they're literally treated like they're God on earth half the time, like there's something special. And then you look at them throughout history and they're mostly just idiots.
But they literally are. They are ordained by God.
Yeah. Yes, sure.
So they are king, but they were also king in essence from God.
Mm-hmm.
I read a book called The King's Two Bodies, which was basically about that. It was about the king's physical form and then the king's ordained form.
Yeah,
so the ordained form is like the king is dead, long live the king. And then he's also a physical being. So it's like he has two bodies.
Sure.
Whatever. He had an average upbringing for a royal child, raised by nannies and tutors and indirectly from the parents. He attended 2 Royal Naval Colleges, was withdrawn before formal graduation, and then served in the Royal Navy as a shipman for 3 months. Upon ascending as Prince of Wales on his 16th birthday and beginning his formal training as the future king, he was enrolled at Oxford University. But he was desperately unequipped for his educational undertaking. He expressed some interest in the German language and culture, but left without academic qualifications in 1914.
So he's not the type to actually finish anything.
Correct. A tutor that he hated, Herbert Warren, sold him out to the Times saying, quote, "Bookish he will never be," a polite way of saying he wasn't that smart. It was clear that he wasn't seen as suitable for the throne, and his younger brother, Albert, aka Bertie, was seen as a more favorable candidate even by his father. He was shy and had a stutter, but possessed a better temperament. George V is quoted saying, "I pray to God that my oldest son will never marry and nothing will come between Bertie, Lilibet, and the throne." Lilibet was Bertie's daughter and she was Queen Elizabeth II. So that was her nickname.
Yeah.
So he wanted her to be queen even from when she was a baby, basically, I guess, or a young child.
My friggin' firstborn is a moron. Please let this baby take over.
Please
first.
never let him marry, never have a kid. And basically, like, something happened to him so that my younger son can be king.
Well, eventually he just quit like he does with everything. And so.
But George did get his wish in the end. So. If you want a little glimpse of Edward's temperament and personality, here's a morsel for you.
Oh,
Thank you.
Thank you.
When his younger brother, John, died of epilepsy when he was 13, he wrote a letter to his mistress that it was little more than a regrettable nuisance and that John had become more of an animal than anything else. He wrote an insensitive letter to his mother, which has been lost, but he apologized in a different letter where he said he was cold-hearted, unsympathetic swine for writing her the letter, in which he said she knew more than anyone how his little brother meant to him because he hardly knew him, but he felt so much for her as his mother. So he's basically just like,
he's very stupid, but somebody told him, "You are a dick. What are you writing this for?" He's like, "Okay, how do I make up? I don't know. Me write dumb things."
And then he writes to his mom, "I'm unsympathetic, but you know as his mother how much you loved him." Like, okay.
You probably loved your son, unlike me. I know you don't. Oh boy, I know you and nobody else likes me. But you seem to have liked him because you got mad at me when I said I didn't give a shit.
Yeah.
I still don't give a shit about him, but I'm sorry, I guess.
And
that I upset you.
You love him so much.
And I
you
love
him
Lisa
so much. Edward wanted to join World War I, saying it didn't matter if he was killed because he had 4 brothers. The main concern wasn't so much that he would be killed, but that he could be taken prisoner. Instead of joining the army, he visited the trenches. Imagine one day seeing the prince traipsing around the horrible conditions of the battlefield and playing that war was great and being a voyeur to pain and suffering, and then he can just leave and go back to his castle. But he did become popular with the veterans for visiting the front lines.
Yeah, so for actually going there, they're like, "Oh, thanks."
They're like, "Oh, wow, cool." But then he's like, "See you later, I'm going back to my castle."
Like, I'm sure while he's there, he's also like, "I'd love to be here and fighting with you guys, but they won't let me." Not that I care about any of you.
Probably he would go there and 2 weeks later say, "Okay, I'm done."
Yeah.
According to one of the podcast episodes I listened to, which is called Noble Blood, and I recommend it if you're interested in crimes and shitty behavior of people in power throughout history.
There's a lot to dig into.
There is. There's a lot of episodes, and it's still going. So according to that episode, seeing these horrors might have planted a seed that peace was the single most important goal in Europe. The loss of life wasn't worth it. It's a well-intentioned, albeit naive goal, but that's not how things work.
No.
The road to hell is paved with good intentions. Good intentions can still lead to dire consequences. You're like, "Hey, how about world peace, everyone?" I went to the front lines and I say world peace.
Yeah, it's like when you ask Miss America what she wants, he's like, "I want world peace." I'm like, "Oh, I mean, that's nice, but
cool.
It's never going to happen."
He wanted to be an interventionalist, outspoken on foreign and domestic policy, and interfere in constitutional matters, which is really within the power of a monarch. There is nothing stopping them from asserting their will completely, unless they are stopped by the military. So, I mean, they could interfere if they wanted to. Their power isn't stripped, but it's just not.
It's not proper polite to do that.
Yeah, it's not polite to be an actual king. There are some who speculate that he had no regard for conventions, but the conventions of the time weren't an old tradition or concept. Reducing a monarch's role in government began slightly with Queen Victoria, but only because she pulled away as she got older and left governing to Parliament. I feel that it was only Edward's own father who had practiced temperance in politics and rarely interfered. It might be argued that he wished to go back to the traditional conventions from before his father's reign. Courtiers were dreading when he would come to the throne and hoped that he would die in a sporting accident. Like, this guy must have been miserable.
I mean, just from the letter we heard, yeah, I really think he was.
He wasn't aware that, like, people didn't like him.
Yeah,
you know,
I mean, well, he probably
like, he's
grew up
going
in the lap of
around,
luxury. And
like, world peace, but then people are like, God, I wish this guy would die.
Well, it just sounds like he had no charisma, really. He was just
He had no
weirdo.
riz,
Yeah.
as the kids say.
I don't ever want to say that word.
He was considered a very attractive and fashionable man. He scandalously wore a zipper on his fly instead of a button. He was a heartthrob, much like how Prince William was in the 90s and 2000s.
Until he went really bald.
Yeah, I'm sure you didn't know, but he was. It was.
Oh no, I remember.
He was in the teen magazines, like Prince.
He's not hideous.
Prince
Wow.
William, and I remember, like, I didn't even know that there were still kings and queens in England back then.
Well, I think it's because, like, Prince Charles is very ugly.
Yeah.
But he married and had kids with a very pretty lady, and they ended up getting kids who weren't that ugly. So
right, and I remember reading the teen magazines, and I'm like, there's still kings and queens in places, because I was still, like, super into American history and prairie history, and so I wasn't really that concerned with the rest of the world at that point. But then I was like, I had no idea that there were still kings and queens in the real world.
you were into American girls, not British monarch girls, dolls.
Yeah, true. Like, England doesn't have American girls, so.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny that, like, Prince William was considered, like, super hot and then not, like, Harry, but now, like, Harry is considered like
he didn't go bald.
the most attractive one.
Yeah.
And I saw a meme recently that was like, it showed Prince William in the 90s when he was younger, and then it was like after he became, like, under his father's tutelage, they're like, Diana snatched the jeans away from beyond the grave, and I was like, okay. So, but also, like, Prince William is, like, a limp noodle and, like, Harry isn't. So, I mean, as a person, he's more interesting, and he seems to care about things in the real world.
But once his family was pretty shitty and racist towards his wife, he was like, fuck you.
A lot of people are like, you're not interesting and you're petty. Anyway, Edward had a string of affairs with married women and then had affairs on those affairs. So, like, he had a type.
Affairception.
Yeah, he enjoyed the noble pastime of cuckolding.
Oh.
I mean, he preferred married women.
Yeah.
And then he had affairs on married women with other married women. So,
I mean,
I don't know.
Maybe he was just into those that were really, like, desperate in a shitty marriage or something.
Or they just wanted to sleep with him because he was a prince.
Oh, yeah, that too. But
yeah, so I don't know if he did.
You get a married lady and then you know they've got history and they know what to do in bed, maybe.
Right. Yeah, because I don't think it was so much that he had, like, a fetish. It was like people just having affairs all the time, and, like, husbands being okay with it, and wives just, like, sleeping with people. Like, it happened.
Yeah, we got more conservative as time went along.
And then when people look back, they think that past times were more conservative, and they really weren't. It's only in, like, the 20th.
It was the facade that was put up of, well, this is what it's like back then. It was like, well, not really when you get down to the nitty gritty. Yeah,
it actually, like, it was like the 20th century where things really started to get super conservative. So, and that's what we know in our generation. So, was that thinking that the past was so conservative as, like, sexually and whatnot.
Yeah, and the American ideal of, like, well, the 40s and 50s, that's when America was great because everything was so wonderful for everyone. It was like, no, it wasn't. No. It was terrible for most people, and we got super conservative in a lot of different ways as a society, and then started fighting that really hard in the 60s and 70s.
Yeah. In 1931, when he was 36, and while at the home of one of the married women he was sleeping with, he met the woman who would change the course of English history, aforementioned Wallis Simpson. She was an American socialite, once divorced, and currently married to her second husband. On December 20th, 1936, King George V was literally euthanized with morphia and cocaine to prevent further strain on the family due to his suffering, and so his dignity could be preserved and reported in the superior morning paper, The Times, rather than the lowbrow evening papers. His lead physician, Lord Dawson, was a proponent of euthanasia and made the decision without consulting Queen Mary or Prince Edward. And he was proclaimed dead at 11:55 p.m., just 5 minutes before midnight. So he was like, shit, we got to make sure this guy dies on time. So he basically killed him so that his
suffering would end and would be announced in the good paper.
The good paper.
Not in those shitty evening rags.
The respectable paper. Edward became King Edward VIII the same day. It was thought that Wallis was just another mistress, but it soon became clear that he really intended to marry her, and she started the divorce proceedings from her second husband. But the King of England is the head of the Church of England, which means that divorce isn't allowed at all. Oh.
That throws a wrench into things.
Yeah, it does. While he was king, politicians were hesitant to send him the Daily Red Box, which is a box of confidential information and updates to the monarch with the documents and state papers, for fear that people in his household would also be reading the documents. He wasn't known for his discretion.
It sounds like the way that they ended up treating Trump a lot.
Yes. Yeah, it does. He's very Trumpish.
There's been a lot of those. So people are like, wow, there's never been anything like Trump. It's like, no, there's been a lot.
Yeah, there's been a lot
in
of Trumps.
history. Maybe not so overtly in recent U.S. history, but even in the U.S., there's been.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
We know so little of our own history that if you go back and even just look at each president, you would see that Trump isn't even the worst president by far. The government was also worried about his potential to interfere in political matters. For a time, he had a brief interest in the unemployed coal miners in Wales, and he insisted something must be done. Political circles feared that he would get involved politically. However, he never suggested any solutions or change in policy.
Yeah, so he was just, I've got ideas.
Something must be done.
I've got ideas. Something must be done about all these unemployed miners. All right, bye. See you later.
Get to work on that, Dawson.
I gotta go bang another mistress. Did he? Well, we might get into it. I'm wondering, did he cheat on her? We'll find out.
Probably not.
Oh.
Yeah. We'll get into that.
She was the one.
Yeah. In another incident, when it was time for his coins to be minted, he refused to have his profile face the opposite direction as the previous monarch, which was tradition, because he wanted his left side part to be visible on the coin, as in the part of his hair.
Yeah. I mean, it's a really dumb thing for either side to be upset over, I think.
Like, he could have just parted his hair on the other side.
But also, who cares? Like, it's a tradition. Oh, you got to look the other way. It's like, who cares? It's just a coin. I find both of them petty. If
you don't have traditions, the pillars of society crumble.
Someone will try and have their coin collection where everyone's always looking opposite sides so that they can, whack off to it because it's their fetish, and then they won't be doing that, and that person will be really sad.
Wait, what? There's not much to say about his 11th month reign. He spent 2 months of it yachting with Wallis before the public knew who she was. So he really didn't do anything at all besides refuse to have his face one way on the coin and say something must be done for the coal miners. Okay. Edward's father, George V, prophesied previously that within 12 months of his death, his son would ruin himself. Quote, ruin himself. It was 326 days into his reign that Edward officially abdicated. The abdication was seen internally as just as much an issue of his suitability as it was his situation with Wallis. But to the public, it was seen only as an issue of love.
Aww.
In one example of his disregard for conventions, he wanted to go over the heads of state and poll the British people directly to approve his unconstitutional marriage. He said, let the people decide.
They like me, I'm good looking, and they wanted a weird foreigner American so I can marry her. Yes.
But this wasn't viewed as a great love story, but a failure of the king, by shirking his duty for personal pleasure, the greatest failure of a king.
It's not like anything bad was about to happen that would really need a strong head of state.
Foreshadowing.
Dun, dun, dun.
The Archbishop of Canterbury said to the nation that, quote, in his craving for private happiness...
You got to read it with an accent.
I can't.
Okay.
Quote, in his craving for private happiness, had disappointed hopes so high and abandoned a trust so great.
In his craving for a... Oh, I can't remember the rest of the quote.
Yeah, abandoned a trust so great. Like
abandoned a trust so great.
So great.
Marriage.
But Edward felt liberated. He was free from the constraints of the role of king, which he had increasingly not wanted.
The only thing he wants to do is bang.
She bangs. She bangs.
Does she groove?
She grooves. She grooves. She must have. He gave up everything, but also he wasn't suited.
He didn't want it either.
He wasn't suited. He's like, you know what? Actually, I might actually.
Yeah, it wasn't so much giving up as, happily letting go of.
On the night before his abdication broadcast speech, 500 pro-Nazi protesters gathered at Buckingham Palace and were chanting, "We want Edward," and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, "We want Baldwin, dead or alive." Stanley Baldwin was the prime minister. They eventually made their way to Downing Street. Like, is this 1936 or 2021?
Many other times in history where, you got to let the fascists do what they're going to do.
Yeah,
it's
you just
fine.
got to let them march. You know, they got to let them.
It's not going to be too bad.
You got to let them
Let those brown coats go.
Capitol and rowdy things up a little bit.
Look, they're trying to stop the steal. Okay? They're stealing Edward's throne.
Yeah. They're still.
Who is? I don't know. I mean,
Wallace.
Edward essentially is...
Wallace is trying...
No, Edward's stealing his throne from himself.
Yeah. And Wallace is trying to help him steal the throne from himself.
Yeah.
Right to Hollywood. We got a movie.
No, they're too woke. You got to write to Jim Caviezel.
And the next day, 3,000 people showed up to a meeting that was addressed by the leader of the British Union of Fascists, Sir Oswald Mosley. He called for the abdication issue to be decided by the people, which doesn't sound very fascist at all. It was also what Edward himself had suggested. So they were all like, let the people decide, but also like, he doesn't want to be king. So it's not really great to have a king who doesn't want to be king, especially, as you said, foreshadowing the times coming up.
Mm-hmm. It was going to be smooth sailing.
The last government official he met with was Churchill, who had fought hard to prevent the abdication. He had lunch with him and helped him polish his speech, aka wrote it.
Yeah.
Churchill left the meeting in tears.
Giant baby. In many ways, he was a giant baby.
It's like, why does he so insistent on having him stay king? Edward's speech started with him saying, "At long last, I am able to say a few words of my own." But Churchill wrote his speech.
Yeah.
His brother Bertie became George VI, and his daughter Elizabeth became the new heir, just as George V wanted. Edward's newly created title became Duke of Windsor. Every royal generation, there will be like the wild one and the dutiful one.
Mm-hmm.
I'm loosely quoting The Crown. They said something like that. Oh, and I do watch The Crown. I like The Crown. It's good. So sue me. But hopefully it's the dutiful sibling that becomes the monarch. As we've already established, he wasn't going to be missed. Those who knew him well weren't sad to see him go. One person who was friends with his former private secretary said that the secretary was so relieved at the prince's fall that he was like the child in a fairy tale that was given everything except a soul. He had no appreciation for the intellectual or spiritual. He had no friends in this country, and that he never cared for the English or England, and he hated being reminded of his duties.
Jesus.
The sentiments were shared by others. An MP added that he only cared about the cheering crowds, and he never truly considered that abdication meant exile. The Archbishop of Canterbury preached a sermon to berate the Duke. Edward was so pissed that he wanted to initiate a lawsuit. With nowhere to go while he waited for final permission to finally marry Wallace, he stayed in the Austrian villa of Baron Eugene and Kitty Rothschild. He sent all of his shopping bills to the British legation, who eventually passed them off to the Rothschild after an equerry, which is an officer assistant of the royal household, possibly paid the initial ones out of pocket, and the British government said that they would not pay. By the end of his stay, he racked up an 800-pound phone bill while surrounded by 16 framed photos of Wallace and sleeping with a small pillow with her initials.
Aww.
So you want to take a guess at how much 800 pounds is now?
Oh, 800 pounds now. God, a couple grand. Like, it's at least 10.
So it was an 800-pound phone bill. And today, 800 pounds is 45,600 pounds.
Yeah, I was starting to think in the dozens of thousands.
That was just the phone bill.
Yeah.
So he just never considers, like, who's going to actually pay for these things? He just does what he wants.
He got everything he wanted his entire life. And
he's not actually like, oh, who's going to pay for this?
Yeah.
During his interim, he received invitations to open the Zareen Springs nudist colony, become the mayor of Chippewa Falls in Wisconsin, and $1 million with a Hollywood mansion to star in a historical film with Wallace.
He didn't take any of them?
No.
Aw.
I don't think he was allowed to.
Probably not.
He wasn't like allowed to
Just
leave Europe. Yeah. The first of many new shocks came when his brother, the new King George VI, blocked his calls from the Buckingham switchboard after he kept calling all hours of the night to sort out his affairs and to arrange a financial settlement and press for his wedding, which included recognition of Wallace. His own mother was insistent that nothing should give the impression that the royal family accepted the relationship. Remember when I brought up it would be inappropriate to have two monarchs in one country?
Yep.
So this basically is the same issue. His mother even went as far to say that Edward would not return to Britain until her funeral. He wasn't used to people not doing everything he wished.
Yeah, I mean, when you grow up as the heir, you get your butt licked your entire life. And if you choose to get off that gravy train, not realizing what that's going to mean.
Right.
Oh.
I don't know what he expected. I guess he expected that he was going to abdicate and then just be like, oh, now I'm going to live in a castle somewhere.
I'm not going to be the king, but I'm still going to get everything I want.
Yeah, and also still live in England.
Yeah, whatever he wants. He wanted to be in England, be in England. I want to be in the moon. I can probably go to the moon.
I kind of have a hard time reconciling the relationship he had with his mother after he decided to abdicate. Like, you think a mother should love their kid a little bit more, but his mother put duty above her love for her son. So it seems like she honestly didn't want to see him again, at least not in England. And people have often talked about the extreme duty of the kings and Queen Elizabeth in the 20th century. And Elizabeth II took her duty so seriously, and she often put her own relationships under her duty as a queen. And it looks like she was influenced greatly by her grandparents. Mm. So her mother was like, you're not doing your duties, so then I have nothing left to say to you.
And much like her grandma, she probably really didn't want to be around her son, Andrew.
The financial settlement was the nail in the coffin of the brothers' relationship. It was agreed he would receive the annual funds traditionally given to the younger brother of the king, which is £25,000.
Jeez.
1.5 million pounds today. However, the Duke of Windsor lied to his brother about the money he had in his offshore bank accounts. He said that he had £100,000, which is 5.7 million today, when he actually had closer to £800,000.
Oh my God.
Which is 45.6 million.
And yet he's still back. Mike, man, he's friggin'.
He's just kind of like.
I hate rich people.
He's kind of a weasel.
Yeah, well, I mean, when you grow up super rich and then he's like, oh shit, I'm not going to get what I want anymore. He's like, he's got to try and he's going to try and lie, cheat, and steal to get whatever he can because he's so desperate to always be exceedingly wealthy.
And it's still not going to be enough.
No.
So now we'll talk a little bit about Wallis Simpson because I'm sure you're just dying to know more about her.
Mm-hmm.
Wallis Simpson was 2 years younger than Edward.
Just like you and me. You're 2 years younger than me.
Wow. The coincidences. Mm-hmm. As I mentioned, they met at a weekend house party in January of 1931.
We met at a weekend house party in January of 1931.
Whoa.
Damn.
If a weekend house party is World of Warcraft parties.
Yep. We met in the...
But it was in a house. We did play World of Warcraft in a house.
Yeah, we were both in a house.
We did raids, which are kind of like parties.
Mm-hmm. I mean, they are huge parties. They have like 8 parties in them at once.
Yeah. So it's like basically
Those were the 40-man raids. Those were the real raids.
They saw each other occasionally as acquaintances for 3 years, and she became his mistress in 1934. It wasn't long before the prince started talking about marriage.
Work together to get their attunement for molten core.
Or to start talking about marriage.
Oh, that.
When he became king in January of 1936, the situation became disastrous. Wallis was granted a divorce 2 months earlier from her second husband. They had been married for 8 years. Aww. She married her first husband when she was 20, and they were divorced a year later in 1927.
Did she have any kids with either of them?
No, she never had any kids.
Ah.
If she did, it might have actually been worse for their case.
Yeah.
To be divorced and have kids and then marry a king, and you're not even English.
It's the plot of a movie.
Well, Hollywood wanted to pay them $1 million to be in a movie, so...
I mean, having a king who wants to become stepdad to some little Rugrats plebs that weren't ordained by God.
That sounds like an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, actually.
I mean, I'm pretty sure there's been a lot of movies about kings wanting to marry commoners, but never commoners that were already married and had kids.
Right. I mean, it writes itself.
Mm-hmm.
At the time, the Church of England would not conduct a marriage of a divorced person if the former spouse was still alive. And funny considering Henry VIII, who founded the Church of England, married multiple times after being divorced.
Mm-hmm.
But officially, they were annulled marriages. But we all know the truth.
Yes.
So
we all watch The Tudors.
It's funny that the Church of England says, no, you can't marry a divorced person.
Unless you're a really, really powerful,
the whole
crazy
reason
king.
the Church of England existed was because Henry VIII wanted to be divorced and marry people.
Mm-hmm. Do as I say and not as I do.
Because of this, Edward would have to choose between marriage and the crown. Later in life, Wallis painted a rosy picture of herself by saying she tried to remove herself from Edward's life.
What?
She tried to be like, oh, I tried to call it off.
I tried to get her. He loved me so much. I was like, Eddie, baby, you're going to ruin your whole king thing.
Yeah.
And he was like, oh, dear, I love you so much. I can't let you go. Oh.
I don't want to be the one. I don't want to be the one that you give the crown up for.
I didn't want to be the one for Eddie. You said she was American, right?
Yeah, she was from New York. So.
I didn't want to be the one for Eddie, but that he wouldn't leave me alone. He was all over me. He was like, oh, you got such nice boobs. Oh, look at them gams. I'm like, Eddie, darling, come on. From New York. We got bagels. We got pizza. You're just a little, you're cute. Don't get me wrong. You're good in the sack. But, if you want to give it all up for me, I guess I'm not going to say no. But
come to New York.
Yeah. There's some meatballs, some prosciutto. Yeah.
There are some indications that she told Edward to go on without her, but I think it was more of like, no, stop. Wait, why did you stop?
Oh, Eddie, no, don't. Hey, get back here. Eddie, no, don't. Go on. Don't you leave.
But Edward was determined to marry her, even if he had to step down from the throne.
I'm determined to marry you, even if I have to step down from the throne.
I can't do it.
I just have to. You're the only person I've ever loved that isn't me.
Of all the things that he was superficially interested in, the only thing that he truly fought for and refused to back down from was a matter of his own pleasure.
Mm.
Other than being divorced, Wallis was not considered suitable to become a queen. She had been known to have multiple lovers. The prince had spent outlandish amounts of money on her. I'm sure not helping her appear like she wasn't a gold digger.
Well, it's the whole, you're probably going to be like, you got to be pure because you're Lady Jesus because, the other guy's God.
Yeah, and she's already old.
Yeah, she's already used up.
Already an old bag.
Gross.
And she had pro-German sentiments.
I mean...
In 1935, she was put under police surveillance. They noticed that she was fond of the company of men, had many affairs, and apart from the prince, she had another secret lover at the same time. Edward's private treasurer stated to his secretary that Wallis was receiving a handsome income, and he told the prince that he believed Wallis and her husband were working together to get as much out of the prince as they could.
Dude, I really love the Nazis. Oh wait, I'm doing a Boston accent. Oh, Annie, I really love the Nazis. You ever hear this, Penny? I have not, my dear. I'm just kidding. Of course I have. They sound nice. I love their coats.
I love their convictions.
That Hugo Boss, oh my God, the outfits he's going to be making for them. I've seen the future.
But also, there's not really any historical evidence that they were trying to do that.
No.
Try to get as much out of him as they could.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like that's what people are going to say, type of thing. While she waited abroad for the decree absolute concerning their permission to wed, she was under guard by 2 protection officers because there were indications within official circles that she was going to run to Germany.
Ooh.
There was a real threat that...
That's a long run.
It
is. Is you going to run along the bottom of the English Channel? They didn't have the tunnels yet.
I think that they're both on the continent.
Oh, okay.
She's not going to be in England during all of this. I don't know exactly where she was, though. There was a real threat that the decree would not be passed based on collusion and Wallis's adultery with the prince. Phone calls were tapped, and one conversation between her and Edward regarded him not getting what they expected for a post-abdication settlement, where she said She would fight until the bitter end and would tell the British press a story that would make the coronation flop, comparatively.
Uh-oh.
A senior civil servant brought up his concerns to the Chancellor of the Exchequer that Wallis would come back to England, use their settlement from public funds to set up her own court and make things as unpleasant as possible for the new king. And with her unbridled ambition, she would still aim to be queen and interfere in politics as she had been in touch with the Nazi movement with ideas on a dictatorship.
Oh.
And these weren't petty accusations. There was internal correspondence knowing that Wallis had great ambitions. It was also noted that Ribbentrop, the Reich foreign minister in London, used Wallis, but the proof is hard to come by.
It's known. You're going to trust us.
Right. But a lot of...
it's believed to be.
A lot of that, I mean, especially since Ribbentrop was the ambassador, I mean...
It's not a crazy thing.
Right. He's destroying records all the time. Like, he's not keeping records of espionage.
As dumb as many political people are, they're not all always stupid.
Yeah, I don't think Ribbentrop was not stupid. Wallis and Edward married on June 3rd, 1937 in France. Whee! No one in the family came to the wedding, and there were only 7 British guests. The French government had agreed not to broadcast the wedding, and attempts by the American networks were blocked by the French as well. So they're like, no broadcast for you.
No broadcast for you.
One of their friends wrote in her diary that Wallis occasionally looked at Edward softly and took his arm, but, quote, her attitude is so correct and hard. The effect is of an older woman unmoved by the infatuated love of a younger man. Let's hope that she lets up in private with him, otherwise it must be grim.
I mean, with how in love he is, she must a little, you would think.
I don't know.
Unless he's really that desperate.
There's more details about their relationship, so I think it paints a bigger picture.
Uh-oh.
And also, I left out a ton of names because otherwise there's too many names. Yeah, so that's why I'm saying a friend of a friend or this person, because there's no point to say their names.
I assume they all had names.
Yeah. I mean, people had names, you know?
Most of the time.
Wallis confided in Gore Vidal about the morning after her wedding. He was, quote, standing beside the bed with his innocent smile saying, "And now what do we do?" My heart sank. Here was someone whose every day had been arranged for him all his life, and now I was the one who was going to take the place of the entire British government, trying to think up things for him to do.
Boy.
Can you imagine waking up, now what do we do?
Just such a weirdly sheltered... So, like, this is the person that has to oversee the government, essentially. But they've been so sheltered their entire life, they don't know what life is.
What are we going to do today, Mommy? So she was now the wife nanny, basically.
The Wanny.
The Wanny.
The Poo Nanny.
Wallis was denied the title of Her Royal Highness because it could never be revoked. So if the marriage didn't last, she could go on the rest of her life being Her Royal Highness, even if she remarried. Since Edward had renounced his royal rank and therefore her potential rank, the whole point of the abdication was because Wallis would not be accepted into the royal family. They are honeymooning in a haunted German mansion, looking for people to treat as they felt they deserved to be treated, like a king and a queen, looking for people to foot their bills and fawn over them, looking for yes-men and brown-nosers.
Yeah, my bills, even though I've got 50 million pounds in today's money.
Yeah, so they're just like trying to like make their own like royal court where people would just do whatever they want.
Yeah.
Because I guess the king, former king still wanted to be treated like he was.
Yeah, I mean, he wanted all the accoutrements of being a king without any of the responsibilities. And that's, people don't give a shit because you don't have any power anymore.
The marriage has been extensively speculated. Many people, including their own friends, felt that Wallis didn't love Edward the same way he loved her. Their affair was such a scandal and picked apart by the media, and Wallis probably felt like their relationship could not fail. For one, it was a sunk cost fallacy. The king literally abdicated for her. The price of their marriage had been too high, and two, she wanted all the clout that came with being his wife.
She wanted it to end up with her being queen in some way. But
yeah, even if it was just the way people treated her in the end. She's like, okay, well, I'm not going to be queen, but I need to be treated like I'm a queen. One of Wallis's friends stated, "Can you imagine a more terrible fate than to have to live up publicly to the legend of a love you don't feel? To have to face morning, noon, and night a middle-aged boy with no other purpose in life than a possessive passion for you." That is his personality.
You know what that is? He is Ken from the Barbie movie.
Yeah, but he's not Knuff.
No, he's nowhere near.
No.
There's nothing redeeming about him outside of maybe he's got some decent looks. I'm not going to say good looks because for the royal family, decent looks is normally like, holy shit, they're not hideous.
Well, I've seen pictures of when he was young. He was okay.
Yeah.
I mean, like...
Yeah, not hideous.
But, I mean, he was considered conventionally attractive. So... but
does that mean in
also,
England, though?
they both smoke like chimneys. So
Yeah.
when they're like 36 years old, they look like they're like 50.
And it was all diesel fuel all the time. So,
Yeah.
and that, boy, the air quality back then really did a number on you.
Yeah, especially in England with all of their...
Tolkien's favorite Industrial Revolution smog factories.
Mhm.
Those are great for your skin.
Oh, yeah. We all know that. So it's like that became his personality. Like Ken is just, I love Wallace. Like, I heart Wallace.
Kind of
on
like
his
me and you.
t-shirts. No.
I'm just walking around saying how much I love you all the time, and you look at me, you go,
Yeah, maybe sometimes.
Eh.
After favorable articles were published and the American media lost interest, Wallace hired Armand Gregoire, who was also the lawyer for some of Hitler's most important officials, such as his Minister of Foreign Affairs and Ambassador to London, Joachim von Ribbentrop. Also, the Deputy Führer, Rudolf Hess, the Commander-in-Chief of the Luftwaffe, Hermann Goering, as well as the chief contact of Sir Oswald Mosley in Paris, where he was responsible for channeling funds to Mosley's British Union of Fascists from Mussolini.
Jesus.
So he was connected.
To a lot of just wonderful human beings.
He had also been the founder and director of the fascist movement, one of the leading fascist cells. Oh, it's fasciste.
Fascist.
I'm trying to make it sound cool, but it's not fascist. It's fasciste movement, one of the leading fascist cells in France, under the pseudonym of Greg Lefranc.
Greg the French?
Yeah. Wow, so clandestine.
Brilliant.
He had contributed pro-Hitler articles to Le Franciste, the official journal of the movement. Gregoire was considered one of the most dangerous Nazi spies.
I can understand why with that clientele.
Yeah. Also, I want to excuse my speech impediments a little bit because sorry, it is what it is. So sometimes I have a hard time flowing with my speech, and I do have some speech impediments. So I just wanted to put that if I'm saying things incorrectly or if I sound weird, it's just I'm doing my best.
Any mean comments, I'll find where you live and shake your hand to death.
Shake your hand to death.
Nope, didn't say that. All right, next thing.
His appointment only served to confirm the fears of their sentiments toward the Nazis. A German diplomat noted that Hitler was upset with the turn of events in England because he felt that Edward was sympathetic to his cause and would have introduced the Führerprinzip to the UK. The Führerprinzip is the Nazi principle of political authority, basically a dictatorship.
Now, I'm always told that they were the National Socialist Party, so they're actually evil socialists and not a dictator. No.
But actually, the Nazis were socialists. It's like, okay, that's what they called themselves. They weren't.
Oddly enough, a lot of those socialist parties didn't actually run like the actual political ideology.
Right. Surprise.
Surprise.
So I just love how, conservative people are like, the Nazis were liberal. Like, okay.
I mean, if you completely misuse the word and what it actually means, sure.
Sure. Just like the North Korea is the People's Republic.
Mm-hmm.
But they're not.
Run by the people.
Right.
He knows the will of the people, and if you go against their will, he'll kill you.
The Duke was being monitored closely by local diplomats, and also his personal security officer was regularly sending reports to Scotland Yard. There were good reasons for the suspicions against the couple. It was well known that Edward was strongly pro-German. For one, as I mentioned already, the royal family was German. He considered himself almost fully German, that is, over being English. He spoke German fluently and sometimes referred to it as his mother tongue. Part of me is saying that he's grown into this because earlier in his life, they were like, oh, he was interested in German things, but now he's like, it's my mother tongue. And it's like this is
he was getting buttered up probably by them a ton because they wanted to puppet him as a king.
Yeah, this is his new special interest all of a sudden.
They'll give me money and power. Yeah.
Before World War I, he spent nearly every summer visiting German relatives. And hint, hint, they don't go down nicely in history.
Oh.
They don't go down.
They do go down?
They don't go down.
Oh, they don't go down.
Further, He always considered communism as a real threat to Britain ever since the Bolshevik murder of his Russian relations, the Romanovs, including Tsar Nicholas, who was the father of Anastasia. That's why I'm like, father of Anastasia. Everybody knows that story.
Mm-hmm.
The massacre of their family is the source of the missing Princess Anastasia. We can cut out all the middle part or put none of that in there.
No, we're keeping it.
I'm probably going to cut all that
Keeping
out.
every last bit of it. If you cut any of it, I'm never doing this show again.
After World War I, he was thoroughly convinced that there should never be war between Germany and Britain and believed firmly in a strong government. In 1933, a journalist noted that Edward was pro-Hitler, and he mentioned that dictators were very popular and that England might want one. Also, it was no business of England to interfere in Germany's affairs regarding the Jews or anything else.
Okay.
And there wasn't just one or two Nazi-affiliated people they did business with or entertained. Edward's cousin, the Duke of Saxe-Coburg, actually the royal family name before they changed it to Windsor, as we said, so flashing light, was a senior Nazi official.
Oh.
One of those German cousins he summered with. He had great plans for an English-German alliance that he initiated at George V's funeral. It was well known within inner political circles and even debated amongst officials that Mrs. Simpson's social sect is closely identified with a certain foreign government and the ambassador of that foreign government. And that person Wallace was very close friends with was Ribbentrop.
Mm-hmm.
Our friend Ribbentrop.
So there's a chance she didn't care about him at all, and it was mostly just that well, no, because then he abdicated for her, which is not what they wanted. So.
Yeah, I think that this is sort of like a snowball effect kind of thing, that like what happened before wasn't really Nazi related. That I think that there was like some light connections, but after they abdicated, now they're like swarming in on them because they feel like they could use them.
Yep.
And they can use them maybe in the future, about the Führerprinzip. An intelligence coordinator to Prime Minister Baldwin wrote a top-secret memo that Wallace had access to all secret and cabinet papers. She was rumored to be in the pocket of a German ambassador.
Ooh. Ribbentrop.
Wallace was also well connected to the Bedeau family. She stayed with the Bedeaus during her exile, waiting for permission to marry Edward. So she was in France and he was in Austria. After the marriage, they stayed with the Bedeaus in Hungary. Charles Bedeau was a Franco-American businessman and millionaire. He had been suspected of being a German spy since World War I. It was Bedeau that suggested the Nazi labor organization Arbeitsfront should host the Windsors for a tour of Germany.
Aw, what a nice little fun trip for all the family.
Day trip. Mm-hmm. A staycation. Not really.
A workcation.
Workcation. Even before it could be a staycation if they wanted to stay.
It's going to be a great place to be for the next, decade or so. You definitely don't want to miss being inside Germany.
Yeah, like get it while you can get it. Am I right? Even before they caught wind of the German tour, there was somewhat of a panic about how the couple should be treated diplomatically. It had already been a problem, but now it was a capital P problem. Ooh. And making sure that they should not be treated with any official status. The king's representatives will not arrange or condone any interviews or participation in any ceremonies. The couple were not to be invited or stay at any embassy. Public officials were not to meet with them at their arrivals, and entertainment at any embassy was to be unofficial. In September 1937, Fritz Wiedermann, Hitler's personal secretary, met with Edward to discuss the tour, and official arrangements would be made with Fern Bedeau at the end of the month. The British government heard about the tour a few weeks ahead when Edward confided in a British diplomat it would be purely private and another ambassador that it was to observe what was being done to improve the working and living conditions of the laboring class in major cities. No one was convinced. He had never shown any interest in the housing conditions in France and Austria. Also, he seems to be completely oblivious that these people are literally spying on him. Either he doesn't care that they're spying, or he just doesn't have the street smarts to know what's going on.
He does not have any street smarts, no.
Wallace is like under the desk, like squeezing his hand every time he talks. It seems hard to believe that at least Wallace wasn't aware. They have to know that everything they do or plan to do since they've been together has made its way back to intelligence. Or maybe there was some sort of arrangement that he had to inform authorities about his travels, which he did not do personally until the last minute. It gets far enough around that multiple ambassadors advised Edward not to allow himself to be used for German propaganda.
So I mean, they are my new friends, yeah.
So they're like, Edward, stop with the Germans.
No, I am German. I speak in the Dutch.
My mother
Sprechen
tongue.
Sie.
It's been 4 months after they married, and
It's been 4 months since they married.
I was hoping I could leave that open for you to fill. It's been 4 months after they married and 10 months since the abdication. The Duke and Duchess of Windsor arrive in Berlin on October 11th, 1937. Their train is greeted by flags of the Union Jack and swastikas.
Yeah, there was a lot of mixing of those and of the American flag and swastikas, and yeah.
The spy for Britain among them was their security officer, Philip Atfield. He spoke French and German, which was not disclosed to the servants. There were 2 assigned to the Duke and Duchess, and Atfield quickly discovered they were also German spies.
Yep.
Everybody's spying.
Yeah, it's pretty much the way it works.
They visited multiple factories, settlements for working men, and National Socialist Welfare Organization. Can we take a moment to clear up that Nazi Germany was not socialist? I mean, we already took that moment.
But they're called, no, I don't care. They called themselves socialists, so they were. Are you calling Hitler a liar?
Yeah.
Oh.
It's funny because all the Nazis and fascists hate socialism, yet they admire a country that calls itself socialist. Right?
I mean, so like there was that friggin' Something of a Nation, the movie recently about trafficking that came out, and the guy behind it and the financer behind it, and now the guy it's about kind of being about trafficking and grooming, and it's like, yeah, it's you normally yell about the things that you're doing because you're trying to make people think that you're not doing it and that others are doing it.
Right. That's like how all of the politicians who are so anti-LGBT, but yet you always find out that they're having secret, gay sex in hotels and stuff. And it's like, you protest too much. That night, they dined with Ribbentrop, who again was the Reich foreign minister to London, in case because we're going to start getting some names. So they dined with Ribbentrop, Hess, Himmler, and Goebbels. Goebbels later wrote in his diary, "The Duke is wonderful, a nice, sympathetic figure who is open and clear and with a healthy understanding of people. It's a shame he is no longer king. With him, we would have entered into an alliance." Words that go down in history.
Yeah.
Wallace wrote that Goebbels, the club-footed mastermind of Nazi propaganda mills, impressed me as the cleverest of the lot, a tiny wispy gnome with an enormous skull. His wife was the prettiest woman I saw in Germany, a blonde with enormous blue eyes and a flair for clothes. Seen together, they reminded me of Beauty and the Beast.
Jesus.
It's like, why do you even write this?
You don't have a filter.
She was just like, he's a great guy, but I'm going to write everything negative about the way he looks.
Mm-hmm.
An enormous skull. A gnome with an enormous skull. October 13th is where we get the picture of the Duke giving the Nazi salute while visiting the Pomeranian training school of Hitler's bodyguard, the elite SS Death's Head, or in German, the SS Totenkopf, the skull and crossbones symbol.
I love how it's called the Pomeranian.
I mean, I guess where those little cute dogs come from.
Yeah, those little cute dogs that were really great at teaching people how to kill.
So there's a famous picture of him giving the Nazi salute.
Yeah.
And not only the Nazi salute, but he's doing it in front of the training ground for the SS Death's Head, which is like... The Totenkopf had close ties to the concentration camps division, the SS Totenkopfverband. It was initially formed by 6,500 men from that division. So not a great place to be saluting.
That division isn't real because I've been told that the Holocaust didn't happen. So they obviously didn't actually have one of those. The end.
So arguably the worst place. It was excused later as Edward being polite. The days were filled with visits to SS officers' homes, more factories, hospitals, settlements, industrial exhibits, and even a concentration camp.
Yay!
Round it all off. But it gets even better because as they passed by an enormous concrete building, Edward asked what it was, and they replied, "It is where they store the cold meat."
Yeah. That's rough.
October 22nd, 1937. Edward and Wallace arrive in the mountains 70 miles outside Munich on a private train for the highlight of their trip.
Are they going to see Hitler? Yay!
They wait patiently while their host is napping. They are entertained while they wait, and at 2:30, Edward was taken to meet with the Fuhrer, Adolf Hitler, whilst Eva Braun and Rudolf Hess entertained Wallace, speaking to her about music, probably Wagner and some other Nazi shit.
Mm-hmm.
What else? Who else are you going to talk about in Nazi Germany? Is Wagner. That's it.
Pretty much.
And that's about all we know. When the couple left, Hitler affectionately took both their hands in his, then gave a stiff salute, which Edward returned. Since Edward was still a member of the royal family, at least for one afternoon, Hitler was a confidant of the British royal family.
Aww.
A confidant.
Confidant.
The contents of his private meetings with Hitler have been lost, so we don't know what Edward and Hitler discussed, but it's important to point out that these meetings occurred after the Nuremberg laws had been passed, which stripped Jews of citizenship in Germany. He would have seen the signs everywhere stating, Jews are not welcome here. He literally speaks German, so it's not an excuse to say he didn't know, and there wouldn't have been any attempt to hide what was happening while he was there.
They talked about dog training and Jew
He's
killing.
like, oh, I thought the Pomeranian training school was for dogs. So it's like completely opposite of the North Koreans where they try to hide everything. But here it was like he could see. He knew.
He could see and he could hear. He knew all
He
of it.
can't feign ignorance because he could read the language. So he could read all the signs. He knew everything was going
he
on.
just
He
liked them.
understand what everybody was saying.
He liked what was going on.
Yeah, he liked it.
Yep.
And yet he still said, quote, I have traveled the world and my upbringing has made me familiar with the great achievements of mankind. But that which I have seen in Germany, I had hitherto believed to be impossible. It cannot be grasped and is a miracle. One can only begin to understand it when one realizes that behind it all is one man and one will. And the extent of Edward's involvement with the Nazis has been covered up, but the pictures are readily available in a Google search or on our social media
Photoshopped.
at Deceptive Methods Pod on Instagram and Twitter.
Yay.
We know that much more happened that was actively covered up by the royal family. A video from 1933 was recently leaked from the royal archives of Queen Elizabeth and Princess Margaret when they were small children giving a Nazi salute. And who was there clapping and smiling? It was Edward.
Mm-hmm. Well done. Now you're telling me the British royal family's covering things up? I've heard these same lies about Prince Andrew in Epstein Island, and I don't believe it.
They don't cover up.
Not for a second.
And also their mother, Queen Mary, was there in the video too. But this doesn't mean that Elizabeth was a Nazi sympathizer because she was 6 years old in the video. But it shows early support in some form from Edward. So we're not saying that like Elizabeth and Margaret were baby Nazis. It was just Edward was like trying to get them to do it. And then they did it. And they're like, oh, how cute. But
Oh, how lovely.
So it had been a thing for a long time. That he was
being German
from early days a supporter and had been interested in the Nazis.
Yes.
One of his friends later in life said that he would not be surprised if a musty file was dug out of some top security vault.
By Doctor Who. I would say the Doctor, but then people don't know unless you say Doctor Who.
Right. So how do we know about every single movement of the Duke and Duchess during this trip?
Diaries?
There was a lot in the diaries, but much of the speculation about what was covered up comes from the Marburg files, 400 tons of German Foreign Ministry archives found in 1945. Within these files are the Windsor files, or the Duke of Windsor files. The story of finding these files is a life stranger than fiction example.
Oh.
In 1945, when Germany was near surrender, American troops were advancing through the Soviet zone in the Harz Mountains when they came across a Nazi truck with papers strewn about. The captain notices that one of the papers is signed by von Ribbentrop, prompting a local search. They searched neighboring castles and ended up with a cache of 400 tons of files. At the end of it all, there was 1,200 tons uncovered. They were taken to the Marburg Castle in the American zone over the course of several days by 237 vehicles. They were cataloged by Allied intelligence officers. This was a nearly complete archive of the German Foreign Ministry.
Jesus.
But even deeper than that, Hitler's interpreter bartered for safe passage by revealing there was microfilms of the Germans' most confidential material, and it was buried in several metal suitcases on the land of a country house. Within these was a series called German-British Relations and included a volume on the Duke of Windsor. The Americans immediately made 2 copies and sent one to the State Department.
Yep.
They're like, we gotta get this.
We have got ourselves some wonderful blackmail.
You wouldn't believe it.
Holy shitting balls.
They're probably reading this like their eyes are bugging out of their head.
What the fuck is up with this feller?
Who goes and get themselves involved with Hitler?
I mean, ignore all of our summer camps, but still, I mean, we eventually got in the fight.
The royal family, Churchill, even Eisenhower, our American hero, didn't want these papers published. They pushed the American media entities to not publish. Churchill argued the historical importance of the documents was negligible.
Churchill sucks.
They were basically saying that American scholars and the media had to defer to the hurt feelings of the monarchy. And if they were published, the monarchy was to tell them which parts to leave out. They were published in 1957. As far as we know, they are intact. The Queen herself wrote that it is odd to spend so much energy covering up a thing that isn't true.
What?
I don't know. I'm like, what are you even saying?
A bunch of words that don't really end up meaning
I guess
anything.
they're like, well, these are in Nazi files. How can you believe? Why are you believing that?
He was making all of it up. They wrote 1,200 tons of paper. That was all bullshit.
These files show that the Duke and Duchess were a part of a long cover-up, and this cover-up was so long that most of the research in this podcast episode, along with the episode of Noble Blood that I listened to, came from a single book.
Jeez.
Traitor King, that was released last year. It's basically the only comprehensive source of all this information. And I'll tell you what, that's a book only a history major could love.
It's very dry.
Very dry, and 100 names in there. I had to make a dramatis personae of 27 people to refer to while I was writing this. I didn't put their names in there, but while I was reading the book, I'm like, who is this person? Oh my God. And it's like, never mind, I'm not going to get into it. Anyway, Queen Elizabeth finally agreed to allow all the classified documents to be released. So then that guy went through all of it and then wrote that book. So that's all of this that I've been telling you came from that one book. We
only know because of that.
Yeah, and there's some other things I pulled from, about Wallace and him, but...
A little bit of time travel. Just go check for yourself.
And another thing, in the Marburg file, we also find telegrams. The Marburg telegrams between Ribbentrop and Storer, the German ambassador to Madrid, regarding alleged proposals made to the Windsors when they were stuck in Portugal after they fled France. AKA treason?
Oh. Yeah.
But we're focusing on things that aren't true. The Windsors' reactions were implied in the correspondence, and the British really did not want this to be in American hands. The new Prime Minister was advised by the Foreign Secretary to encourage the Americans to comply with suppressing the documents. With a copy of the Marburg files at the Foreign Office and one at the State Department, the British actually destroyed their copy.
Of course.
Churchill thought it might be possible to destroy everything altogether. The U.S. would not destroy their file, but they promised they wouldn't mention the Marburg file at the Nuremberg trials and would prevent any publication without first consulting the British government.
You can totally trust us, bros.
Like, hello?
We are not giving up our leverage on you, but you're going to have to really piss us off if we're just going to put this out there.
Yeah, like we need to have this in the back pocket. But it's so funny that Churchill was like, I think we can just get rid of all of this, right?
I think we can just get the Americans to delete this.
Do we need this?
I'll write a big-ass speech and say it to them, and Truman will bend over like a little girl.
Edward broadcasted an appeal for peace on NBC in 1939, saying that only American intervention could prevent war. The BBC refused to air it. In a passive-aggressive power move, he broadcasted this as the king and queen had just left for a goodwill tour of the United States. Like, there you go. Have fun with that in America.
Here you go, bro.
It also gives celebrities singing Imagine from their mansions when COVID hit. He was like, why would he air a peace talk in America where there was no intention for America to fight? It was just to upstage his brother right before he got to America. Have fun with that.
Petty, bitchy family drama. at the regal scale.
He also wrote a personal missive to Hitler, quote, "Remembering your courtesy and our meeting 2 years ago, I address to you my entirely personal, simple, though very earnest appeal for your utmost influence towards a peaceful solution of the present problems." 6 days later, Hitler replied, quote again, "Assure you that attitude towards England remains the same, and my wish to avoid a new war between our two countries remains. It depends, however, on England whether the relations between the Germans and English can find the correct channel."
Will you hate the Jews enough?
The hubris of this dude to think that he could ask Hitler very nicely with a cherry on top not to start a war. War was declared by England the next day.
Oh, there you go.
When Edward was told by the British embassy, he said to Wallace, "Great Britain has just declared war on Germany. I am afraid in the end this may open the way for world communism." And then he dove into the swimming pool.
Man, what a
like
douche.
That is true that like Edward is just like the celebrity singing Imagine, like right when COVID hit. That's who he is.
Yeah.
When war was declared, Edward and Wallace were offered a plane out of France, but the offer was rescinded when Edward's demands weren't met. What were the demands? You
I'm gonna guess
I knew you were. I knew you were.
Yeah,
gonna
I'm gonna
ask.
guess that they make a lot of sense, and they're not at all the petulant
I mean, they're perfectly
whinings.
reasonable.
Oh, okay. Let's hear them then.
They had to be invited to stay at Windsor Castle. Edward had to be given a wartime job, and mainly, Wallace had to be given the status Edward believed she was entitled to.
Very reasonable things that were definitely going to happen.
And were really important.
Mm-hmm.
Edward's advisor arrived by plane to try a second rescue, but he was also rejected because Wallace was scared of flying and there wasn't enough room for their luggage. They keep trying to get them out of France. They're like, "We're trying to get you out, you idiot."
You are unbelievably lucrative targets for Germany.
He requested...
No, he loves me.
He wouldn't hurt me.
Me and Hitler are best buds.
I correspond.
Look, I speak with German accent
Look
now.
Look at these letters. We correspond. We're friends.
He very gently held our hands, yeah. Ellie, baby, why are you talking like that? Because I love being German.
He requested Churchill send a destroyer or other naval vessel to be sent for them and their luggage and servants. The request was granted. And although they weren't met by any family, received no message, and weren't offered a car or a place to stay, but they were met by a Royal Marine band after Churchill intervened. It was like France is like literally being invaded, and Britain declared war, but they had to set up the band to receive them. Can you imagine them running off the ship like dur, 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 and then like running back on because they're like, "We need to fucking go.
We don't want to get shot. Get on the goddamn ship."
Edward saw his brother, the king, for the first time since he left England. It didn't go well.
Really?
George wrote in his diary that Edward was only thinking of himself and to make sure that no one told or showed him anything secret. There was talk about what to do with him, and eventually he was sent back to France as a liaison with a British military mission in France. In that position, he was determined to be a major security breach because he was sharing classified information with Wallace, who in turn was simply handing over the intel to the people connected to Germany.
Jesus Christ.
It has also been argued that, with or without his knowledge, there was a German agent in his immediate entourage. Others argue that there were several of Bedeau's staff that worked for the Windsors.
Sleeping with Bedeau.
Waiting for Bedeau. After feeling that his contributions were frivolous and unrecognized, there were actually some reports he made that were disregarded and had repercussions for the French and British. But by 1940, he was often found on the golf course or taking long weekends or dining out with Bedeau. Basically, they didn't want to do the work unless they were praised constantly. No matter that most people who are working in a war do not get praised constantly.
Yes, it's almost like you're working to help other people, not to make yourself feel better.
Edward really wanted to meet with British troops, and he flew to London to try and get the ban lifted. But he also had another reason for his visit. He wanted to persuade the government to negotiate with the Nazis to end the war. He met with a retired general who had been an active member of the British Union of Fascists, and a lord who was agreeable with Edward after being the leader of an international peace movement and a rival leader to his brother the king.
I'm going to go behind your back again, brother. By the way, I don't do the German thing anymore now that I'm finally back in England where I belong. Meh. Meh. Yes.
They all met at the home of Edward's advisor, who overheard the meeting and the agreement between the men that there should be a peace offer to Germany. He reported this to the head of the Foreign Office news department and then shared this with a diplomat who logged it in his diary. This diary and another diary entry from a separate person both recorded that Edward was encouraged to return to Britain after the inevitable collapse of France to lead a movement for peace with Germany. Edward's advisor told them all that this was treason and that if Edward did this, then he would be subject to taxation in Britain if he moves back. So Edward called the whole thing off.
Yep. That's if you want to control him, you just tug at those purse strings a little bit.
They're gonna want to take some of your money.
Yeah, I mean, for treason, for anyone else, they chop the head off, but for you, you'd lose a little bit of money. Oh no!
And of course, all of this had made its way back to Germany. The German ambassador to The Hague had 2 communications about this potential movement. In one, he explained he had used intermediaries through Ribbentrop to get to Edward and try to influence him. At this point, it seems that Churchill might have given Edward false information about resistance plans for Belgium to see if the report would make its way back from a British spy in The Hague, and it did. The leak was confirmed to be Badeau and the information he was given by Edward. When Germany invaded France on May the 10th, they targeted the Ardennes, which the Windsors had revealed from the reports was vulnerable. Probably the Ardennes.
Did you see Ardennes? Oh.
Allegedly, Edward had spent the days post-invasion tearing up and burning secret documents. I found it interesting that Edward's uncle was sent in September of 1939, 9 months previously, to keep Edward from taking a single piece of paper home where it could make its way to Wallace's hands. Communication on May the 20th states that the Duke was not to be given any military info besides common knowledge, and even with that, as little as possible.
If he asks you, is it Saturday, only after the 5th time can you say yes.
On the morning of May the 27th, Edward's best friend and private secretary, Fruity, who had been working for months without pay, woke up to find himself abandoned by the Windsors, who had fled at 6:30 a.m.
Aww.
He wrote to his wife, quote, "He never made one single mention of what was to happen to me or his paid comptroller Phillips. He had taken all cars and left not even a bicycle. He has denounced the Souchet house of all articles and value and all his clothes, etc. After 20 years, I am through. Utterly, I despise him. I fought and backed him up, knowing what a swine he was for 20 years, but now it is finished. The man is not worth doing anything for. He deserts his job in 1936. Well, he's deserted his country now at a time when every office boy and cripple is trying to do what he can. It is the end."
He sounds like a big fan.
Yeah, he was working for free, basically, for all those years because, they
he
were
only
friends.
He only had like $45 million in the bank.
The only friends he had were people that worked for him. And then he screwed them all over. He was just like, see ya, you guys find your own way.
He seems like a bit of a douche.
The Windsors headed to neutral Spain. It is important to point out that they refused to leave by cargo boat because they could only bring 2 suitcases. Instead, they went by an envoy of 3 vehicles. I mentioned this before, but I've been leaving out people's names who aren't central to the narrative, but Comptroller and Private Secretary Gray Phillips shall be named.
Gray Phillips.
Yes, Comptroller and Private Secretary. Also joining them was Captain George Wood, who had attached himself to the Windsors while they were in the south of France. Someone had sent a note to Churchill that Wood was believed to be a secret agent and was a nasty piece of work who would be a bad influence.
He's a nasty piece of work and he'll be a bad influence.
So Spain. Madrid had the greatest concentration of German intelligence outside Berlin, and the hotel that the Windsor stayed at, the Ritz, which was one of the most active centers of the German Secret Service. The Windsors weren't able to stay at the ambassador's residence because it wasn't equipped for distinguished guests. They couldn't.
It's not fancy enough.
And also it's like wink, wink. You don't want to stay there
No,
when you could be at the Ritz.
Yeah, you can't stay near all of our very important documents. Sorry. There's nowhere. They're just all over the place. There's nowhere for you to be.
You might find better company at the Ritz.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's where they are putting it on. So.
God. When they arrived, the German ambassador messaged Ribbentrop asking him if they should detain Edward and establish contact. It was even alleged that the Windsors were guided to Spain by the Germans via Ribbentrop and the British consul in Nice. The Germans knew nearly immediately of the Spain plan, even over all the other plans, included leaving by cargo ship from 2 probable ports in France. So it's like they immediately knew what was going on when he was moved to Madrid. The Windsors were supposed to head to Portugal, but Edward's brother was there for some celebration, and they didn't think the 2 brothers should meet.
But they get along so well.
Which was a really bad idea. British intelligence probably wanted the Windsors to get out of Madrid ASAP. There was also the issue of finding a job for Edward if and when he returned to England. By the end of June, Edward wrote to Churchill that he was obviously an embarrassment and no post there would change that, so he asked to be useful to the Empire somewhere else. He's like, well, obviously you don't like me, so... There was always quite a few letters going out to wives that state how much they disliked and distrusted Edward. And the longer he stayed in Madrid, the more he became a problem for the British. From Spanish intelligence, we learned that he blamed the Jews, the Reds, and the British Foreign Secretary, and the people in the Foreign Office, which he would like to, quote, put up against a wall.
Jeez.
He believed if the Germans bombed England effectively, it would bring peace, and he hoped this would occur since he wanted peace at any cost.
I want peace at the cost of formerly the people I was in charge of protecting to all die. Just get bombed to shit so we give up.
You gotta, what's the phrase? Knock over a few something or others.
You gotta break a few eggs?
Yeah. Knock over a few eggs.
Yeah, you gotta knock over and then break a few eggs. That is the term.
Via the Russians, we find out that the Windsors were, in fact, in touch with Hitler and that they were in negotiations for a new English government, a military alliance against the USSR, and peace with Germany.
Okay. It's just treason all around.
I mean, they're just like stomping through it.
Mm-hmm.
The day after these revelations, Churchill then sent a telegram asking Edward to return to England as soon as possible.
Get back here, fucko!
Edward keeps holding out, demanding a post for him somewhere, tax exemption, and also, very important to note the also, be received by the King and Queen and have a notice published in the court circular.
Oh my God.
As in, this was equally as important as the other demands.
Jesus Christ.
I just want to get my wife in front of you and I just want you to nod to her or something. It's
Please appreciate me.
Appreciate my mommy nanny wife.
Look at her. She's so pretty.
And Churchill is basically like, get your ass back here now. After receiving offers for multiple military positions, he dropped the position demand completely for only being received by the King and Queen.
Please.
And he's just staying there in the middle of like a Nazi hotbed of spies this whole time.
Ignore my treasonous thinkings. Come on.
And he's also like, hey, would it be so bad if they bombed England if we got peace
Look,
in the
maybe
end?
you'll get a bomb on your head. If that ends the war, it's worth it.
And I mean, and that's what Hitler also says. We'll drop a few bombs and have peace.
I've been talking with old 80, and, we're just thinking, hey.
I just agree with old little Hitler.
Maybe if he can get in there with a couple of bombs, he takes some of you scoundrels out, and then we get peace, and we go after the Reds and the Jews and the Americans.
Adolphe, as I call him, little Adolphe, we want the same thing. After a week of this, the Foreign Secretary then pleaded with Churchill and Edward's close friend to help him draft a message to Edward to get him to freaking leave for England already. Churchill was sick of Edward's shit by this point and threatened Edward with a court-martial.
I don't want a court-martial. I want the actual king to come and see me and say, I love you, brother. You're the best. And wow, your wife is so cool.
That he had taken active military rank and was refusing to obey orders. They're finally like, we're going to fucking arrest you. At this point, it was an open secret that Edward believed that he would be restored in some fashion to the throne under some kind of Nazi rule. Specifically, a Gauleiter, which is a political official governing a district under Nazi rule. Even his own brother, upon his return from Lisbon to Madrid, told a socialite over dinner, quote, my brother wants to be a Gauleiter.
My brother wants to be a cuck for Hitler.
After 9 days in Madrid, they left for Lisbon. In Lisbon, they stayed in the manor of Espiritu Santo Silva.
Espiritu Santo Silva.
He was the head of a bank of the same name, which was used for the transmission of German funds to their agents. Their direction to that particular estate was arranged by the Germans being the manager of the hotel they were intended to stay. The hotel informed the Windsors that they did not have room for them. However, they were only planning to stay there for one night, and there were 2 RAF planes ready to fly them to England. Instead of that happening, Churchill went behind the backs of everyone to appoint Edward the governor of the Bahamas. They're like, he's not fucking coming back here.
You are going to go to a beautiful island colony where we treat everyone terrible and you just get to fuck off and Jesus Christ, go away.
The Bahamas was such a low-status appointment that the governorship didn't even come with a knighthood. But the Bahamas was as far from Hitler that the royal family and prime minister could send him. Basically the equivalent of putting him in the corner or sending him to his room. There is plenty of evidence that Edward was pro-Nazi, but there is a telegram from Churchill himself that admits this to the prime ministers of Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa. He states that the activities of the Duke on the continent had been causing, quote, grave uneasiness as his inclinations are well known to be pro-Nazi and he may become a center of intrigue. He goes on to state that it would be dangerous for him to be allowed to move freely on the continent and it would be an embarrassment to the king and government. His appointment to the Bahamas would be the least of possible evils and asked the ministers to preserve complete secrecy with the intel. I mean, he's telling all the prime ministers he wants to be a Nazi.
Yeah.
But don't tell anyone.
He wants them to win against us, essentially, because then he thinks he'll get to, get some of his power back.
Yeah, be a puppet king. But I don't think so much that he wanted to be the king as that he wanted the Germans to conquer England.
Yeah.
Like, he already didn't want to be king, but he wanted to, like, let himself be used.
Yeah, because he doesn't have to actually think. He's just going to he's going to say whatever they tell him to do.
Right. In this time frame, there had also been a secret mission to retrieve any potential correspondence between Edward and his royal German cousins before and during the war. King George was worried there might be a Windsor file somewhere with their Hesse relatives since Prince Philip of Hesse had been an intermediary between Edward and Hitler. The same agent was also tasked with retrieving, if they existed, the minutes of the meeting between Hitler and Edward. They had to have been destroyed because that is a singular major meeting to have basically been wiped out of existence.
Yeah. King Edler.
Hitler et al.
Adolf Windsor.
Hitler et al. Then proceeded to plan to kidnap Edward. So here's that timeline. We find out later from an interrogation of a Nazi intelligence officer about Hitler's offer to the Duke of, quote, the alternative right of residence in either Switzerland, Spain, France, or Germany, a guarantee as to his own personal safety, together with an annuity of $100,000 US, which is 2.2 million US dollars.
That's a lot of money.
An intelligence source in Prague sent a memo to British intelligence that said that the Germans expected assistance from the Windsors, with the Duchess desiring to be queen at any price. There had been negotiations with her since June 27th. The Germans proposed to form an oppositional government with the Duke after changing the public opinion with propaganda. The Germans thought that the king would abdicate during the attack on London. It was clear that the British intelligence truly thought it could not be underestimated the power that Wallis had over Edward and the extent she would go to avenge herself on England. While the Windsors stayed at Santos estate, they were basically prisoners. They knew they were under constant surveillance, surrounded by informers, and under guard. They could only leave the grounds under observation. The German ambassador to Portugal wrote to Ribbentrop that the Duke intended to postpone his exodus to the Bahamas for as long as possible in hopes that things will turn in his favor and for peace with Germany. He felt that continuous heavy bombing in England would encourage the push for peace.
My God.
The ambassador was determined to get the Windsors back to Spain, where it would be easier to carry out plans. He thought maybe an invitation from a Spanish friend would work. Through intermediaries, the Windsors were invited to stay as guests of the Spanish government with a capital G. Spanish government. Edward asked if one of Wallis's maids would be permitted to travel back to Paris to retrieve some of their possessions that they would need in the Bahamas. This would postpone the trip. The maid was given safe passage to Paris, of course. In Operation Cleopatra Whim...
Okay.
The Americans sent back one of Wallace's favorite bathing suits.
Jesus.
The Operation Cleopatra whim.
Mm.
The Americans with their freaking petty operation names.
That's pretty good.
Just for a bathing suit.
It's just you got people they don't live a normal life. They've been treated like they're super special by everyone below them, essentially, who is pretty much everyone.
Mm-hmm. And so these Americans are like, these fucking people. In occupied France, the Nazis made sure that everything went smoothly and that the Windsors, aka Wallace, was 100% pleased with the inventory list, transportation, and special instructions. The British government denied their request to sail to the Bahamas via New York, where Wallace wanted to get medical care. They wanted to prevent them from staying too long in America, where they couldn't be controlled. Two sources informed that the Windsor said that they intended to stay in America whether Churchill liked it or not, and their proximity to the USA meant that they could spend far more time there, and also prevent them from doing major damage propagandizing for their radical peace. Since they were so outspoken against the British government, their presence would be quite harmful and confusing, as in the people might think that Edward was speaking on behalf of the royal family and the British government.
Their radical piece of wanting their own country to get bombed to shit.
Yeah, all because they're all because of communism.
Mm-hmm.
But socialist Nazis? I mean, like,
socialism they're not really socialist.
Exactly.
They're
This is what I'm saying. It's like
we all know it. We just talk
socialism
shit.
Is just like communism that works. A form of communist theories that you can actually use and it works. It works in other countries. It fucking works. I mean, it's not perfect, but
that's because people aren't perfect. Like any government system could work if the people running it were actually good.
Right.
You can't trust that. It's not the case normally.
Mm-hmm. Edward starts to become agitated and indecisive at this point. I mean, treason at this level is a little stressful, right? But he was actively participating in the plot. It was reported that Edward had no plans to leave Portugal until October, and that he was ready to return to Spain and applied for a visa. The Germans had intel that Edward was planning to completely break with his brother, the king, and English policy. He was in shock at the English's rejection of Hitler's peace offer.
He sounds really stupid.
And like he just doesn't care. He thinks he's above the law. He's like, oh, Churchill says he's gonna arrest me. Well, try.
Yeah. You think you can do that to me? You can't.
Now the Germans enacted their new plan, Operation Willie. I don't know why it's called Willie.
Because they really like the whale.
Willie. Introducing Walter Schellenberg, an SS intelligence officer, doctor, and lawyer who was tasked with persuading Edward to work for the Germans via persuasion, either with 50 million Swiss francs or by force.
Oh. Yeah, you can have this big thing of the money, or I just beat the shit out of you.
But Schellenberg knows that this is dumb. Schellenberg arrives in Lisbon on July 26. The same afternoon, Edward had met with a German agent who brought with him a letter stating that if the Windsors didn't leave for Spain, they would be assassinated by the British intelligence and that they needed to be escorted to the border of Spain.
They're going to kill you. Go, hurry.
Come on, we gotta go. But they're like, but we need to have 10 cars and all of our.
Dude, I don't have my bikini.
Edward asked to have 48 hours to think about it.
I need a couple of days.
They're going to kill you, but I need 48 hours because
they're not going to kill me. I'm the God King.
They were, of course, pushing him to agree to this plan, to get him to Spain, to use him to push for a peace conference, and then the Germans would give him the throne. Edward was so indecisive, still wanting to hold out for some perfect sign that he absolutely needed to turn against his brother. The British had been listening to German intelligence transmissions and immediately sent his old friend and advisor, Monckton. Monckton and Churchill's persuasions worked, and in the end, he decided to head to the Bahamas, knowing that if he needed to return quickly, he could be back in Europe within 24 hours. Edward gave a press conference at the British embassy that he was heading to the Bahamas on August the 1st, and Ribbentrop gave the orders from Hitler to Schellenberg to abduct him outright. They knew that once he was in the Bahamas, there would be no way he could be able to get back to Europe with all the surveillance he would be under. Ribbentrop asked Santo to delay the Windsors as much as possible. The Portuguese Prime Minister was summoned by the German ambassador and pressured to keep the Windsors in Portugal. The son of a former Spanish dictator also tried to dissuade Edward from leaving. They tried to convince the Windsors that the British were plotting against them. Wallace was sent a bouquet of roses with a warning against the British, that their driver was bribed to refuse to take them to the ship. The transportation of their luggage was sabotaged, arriving late to the port.
No, my bikini!
There was even a bomb threat called on the ship, and they were delayed further while it was searched. Edward hesitated right up until the last minute, even stalling the ship from leaving, but in the end, they departed the evening of August 1st as intended.
Aww.
So the Germans were, there's a bomb. They're going to kill you.
There
Your
is a
luggage
bomb
is
on
late.
ship. Be careful. We put it there.
And then she was sent the bouquet that was like, worry about the British. They're gonna do something. There's a bomb. They're gonna kill you. No luggage. Edward reminds me of me in this kind of situation. I will delay until the absolute final second that something can be delayed when I have to make a judgment call.
Yeah, when you were trying to decide if you were going to betray your country and go against your sister, man, it took you forever to come to terms with that.
I shouldn't be allowed to make judgment calls. I've given Jesse permission to not let me make judgment calls under duress.
I'm very good under pressure, and you're not.
Before he set sail, Edward agreed to stay in constant communication with Santo, and it was later found out that he had set up a secret code word with Santo so that he could return to Portugal via Florida if he was needed.
Always Florida.
Man. And there was one telegram received in Portugal from the Bahamas asking Espirito if the moment had arrived. This exact telegram was never found, only alluded to. It seems that the correspondence before and after that were destroyed by censors. The same day, Hitler issued Directive Number 17 that initiated the full-scale attack of England.
Oh, hooray! They're finally bombing like I wanted. I'll be in power in no time.
But he was like, well, he's gone, so watch out, England. You may be wondering, as I did, why didn't they just abduct the Windsors? Because, they were there. There was no direct explanation about why Schellenberg, who was a decorated Nazi intelligence officer, didn't do it. He blamed the failures on Mockton, the failure of the Spanish lure plot, and Edward's mentality of what was right with his role after abdication. That he couldn't actually become king after abdication. It was assumed that Schellenberg simply thought the plan was ridiculous and would never work out, so he refused to kidnap the Windsors. He mentioned in his memoirs that his role in the operation was ridiculous. I also think that it would have been really hard to actually get to the Windsors without violence. It's not like he could just walk into the compound. And this was all happening in a matter of 2 or 3 days. So it was like...
No planning, no...
Yeah, they were just
nothing.
throwing all the spaghetti at the wall, trying to make something stick. And this guy Schellenberg was like, this is fucking ridiculous. So he didn't really try. He was like, this isn't going to work. The Windsors remained in the Bahamas until the end of the war in 1945. Coincidence? Question mark?
No, not at all.
But there are many rumors of his loyalty during the war. It is suspected that he leaked info to the Nazis, that he wanted England to be bombed, which we know now that he did, that Roosevelt ordered surveillance on him and Wallace when they visited Florida in 1941, since the FBI heard that Wallace was sleeping with the German ambassador. And the Crown denies all of this.
No, it did not happen.
It is difficult to set this up linearly because there are so many aspects that do not make sense until you have later information. After his trip to Nazi Germany, there was a huge trip to America planned. After the trip was canceled, Edward said that he considered himself no longer a public figure. And it's worth mentioning that during an interview with the Daily Herald at the end of 1937, Edwards said that, quote, if the Labour Party wished and were in a position to offer it, he would be prepared to be president of the English Republic. The late ambassador to Paris, who was there at the time with his successor, urged the journalists to have this left out of any published account of his interview, as he was shocked and horrified. The journalist promised to do so. But either way, Edward's sympathy to the Nazis was more than what England was comfortable with, possibly even scared of. But in the end, he ended up not siding with the Nazis, and I guess we'll never find out why exactly.
Because he was a wishy-washy little bitch who wouldn't actually do anything until he knew for sure that it was going to work.
And that he wouldn't be taxed.
Yeah.
And then another question is, why did Edward visit the Nazis and salute? Was it pure naivete, or did he really believe that a dictatorship was the best form of government?
I would go, he just liked the Nazis.
Did he think that this would be the best path to peace in Europe?
I don't think he cared about peace in Europe.
Yeah, I think he was always just like, but peace. But peace.
No, if I say I love peace and I really want it, but then I don't do anything, people are like, oh, he really cared about peace. He wasn't all about himself, Governor. He wanted peace. He really cares about us.
But then the further question is, peace for who? Because he was known to make derogatory comments about Jews, Native Australians, and black people. But they did work towards good in the Bahamas with labor rights and infant health.
Oh, poor little babies. I guess they're not so evil.
And how much impact did he actually have? Roosevelt himself sent a ship of Jewish refugees back to Europe. Philip, the future husband of Elizabeth, was also photographed with the Nazis at his sister's funeral. What we can allow ourselves to believe is that Edward did do all this in part for personal interest. After being shunned by his family, he was complacent to let the Nazis potentially use him as a pawn to get the treatment he thought he deserved.
He's like, I gave it all up, and boy, I kind of miss it. Not the responsibility, but if I can be a puppet version of that, oh boy.
If somebody could just, like, do things for me and I don't actually have to, like, do king things.
If I get to be the king who has puppet strings, I'd love it.
And we will work for Welsh miners' employment.
I will really care about all the babies and the puppies and the kittens.
Against popular thought at the time and after, Edward wasn't going to be a modernizer, a reformer, or a fighter for the little guy. Those poor Welsh miners, they've been so important the whole time.
We need to do something to help them. Okay, bye.
It was a ruse before he abdicated, and when he left his post in the Bahamas, he was never involved in any charitable works. He had no genuine philosophical or idealistic thoughts or true beliefs in the causes he temporarily supported. He could have used his time after the abdication to show he was really a good person who held worthy beliefs and proving himself, but he did nothing. Coincidentally, the same as Princess Margaret.
Yep.
Elizabeth's younger sister. They always act like they cared about things, but then they never actually did anything.
Yeah, it was just making people think you cared about things.
Like virtue signaling now. Like, but I care. It's like having a black square on Black Lives Matter on your Instagram. It's like, doesn't fucking do anything. It was a great thing that Edward abdicated, because if he hadn't, then England would have assuredly become an Axis power rather than an ally.
Yeah.
Imagine what would have happened if he didn't abdicate. England most likely would have never gone to war with Germany. They might have become Axis rather than allies, as we said. They might have turned fascist, saved a portion of the 50 million people killed in World War II.
Or they would have killed him. I mean, Britain. They would have had him killed.
Before that happened?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Churchill
assassinated.
would have.
Yeah. I
mean, literally.
I'm surprised that
we're going to become Nazis. And then Churchill's just like, fuck off.
I'm surprised that Churchill didn't, like, use physical force sooner with him to get him out of England. I don't know why he was farting around on that.
Because he had been king and he was the king's brother and, you know.
But also the kings already didn't like him. And so I'm just like, I'm sure he would not care if Churchill physically took him out of England. And maybe even left Wallace there. Like, fuck off, Wallace.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Well, it's the proper society. They're rich. They're powerful. You got to be way more careful with them. It's not like a soldier who you don't really give a shit about and you'll just send off to die or do whatever you want. It's the former king, the king's brother. I've got to be nice. I can't do certain things to them. It's like,
yeah. But I mean, George already hated him anyway. So.
Yeah, but if you do it to one of them, then you could potentially do it to any of them. So it sets a bad precedent in their minds.
What would have happened if Edward met a Wallace who was happily married? Would we have a king of England who supported the Nazis? Even Hitler himself stated that if Edward had remained on the throne, that everything would have been different, quote unquote. Do you think the Axis would have won the war with England on their side? Would America have even joined the war at all?
Food for thought.
England isn't actually a monarchy. It's a representative constitutional monarchy. So it would have been the prime minister and the government that would have made the decisions about the war. However, as I said before, there's nothing absolutely stopping the king from reclaiming his power. It would have been up to the people, government, and the military to stop that, as we already talked about.
Yeah, I think the military probably would have.
Would they have been able to, or what would have stopped the Nazis from setting up Edward as puppet king? So it's like, who's to say that like Mosley, the fascist leader, if they would have gathered support, because even when they were just protesting his abdication, they had 500 people there.
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot of people. I mean, they really could have just gone to like some sort of internal war to like keep Edward on the throne.
Yeah, I don't know that there's enough. There's never nearly as many hardline conservatives as you think there are.
Yeah.
They're just louder. Like even in this country, the Republican Party is like 25% of it. It's not half, but they act like they're half.
They say, but then they don't actually show up, right?
Yeah. Well, there's just not that many of them in general.
There was a speculative history book that I read about Nazi England, and it was called Widowland. So I love me some speculative history. So if anybody has like good podcast recommendations about like speculative history things, then just let me know, because I love speculative history.
That'd be deceptivemethods@gmail.com if you want to let us know.
So some people think that like if he hadn't abdicated, then England would be a Nazi state, and then the monarchy would just be dwindled down to eventually not having a monarchy at all.
Makes sense.
And I'm sure a lot of people would be quite fine with that. But in trade, England would have been a fascist state. And I'm fairly certain that Germany would have won the war with England on their side. And then they would have turned all their might against Russia. Mm-hmm. Edward himself did publicly state, while promoting his and Wallace's memoirs, that it is a wasteful exercise to speculate on a fiction of what might have been. I don't believe that for 1 second. I know that Edward thought all the time about what might have been.
It was his entire personality.
The original photograph of Edward saluting during the visit to Nazi Germany went to auction in 2015. No one bought it. The end.
Wow. It's always nice to go through history and see, boy, they really tried to scrub it for a very long time, but at least some of it came out eventually. It's going to be real interesting looking back at our recent history. I mean, we're just seeing now like, oh yeah, they knew the Iraq war wasn't legitimate pretty much the entire time. They just wanted to go get oil.
I don't know. I know that like times have been hard before, but it does feel like what's happening like right now is like really important to our future, because everything is just so divided.
And we need, as much as people don't want to, we need to do what we can, what's left now at this point, to try and stop things like man-made climate change. And there's just...
And not to be Edward and just say like, wow, things are bad, but to actually do something. But I don't think that's going to I don't think it's going to happen.
No, because we're not very good at things actually happening most of the time.
I don't think that climate change is going to be stopped. I feel sorry for our children's adulthood and like their children. I feel like things are going to be really bad.
Because everything's being like Nancy Pelosi just said, I'm going to run again. And she's like 81 or 82 or something.
Old people need to get the fuck out.
Once you're 65, you should probably be done in government. You're really old. You've done your service.
Care as much about the future.
You don't understand a lot of, like, we're iterating on technology so fast, and then you listen to these people set policy, and they have no idea what they're setting policy on. Yeah. I can go back to the internet is tubes guy from government. It's like, it's not gotten better. We get some young people in that know what they're talking about, but it's still mostly just a bunch of old shitheads.
It's not enough. Like, there really should be an age limit.
Freaking Mitch McConnell is literally falling apart. His brain doesn't work good no more. His hands were turning black for a while. Like, he's rotting from the inside out, but he's never going to quit because he wants to keep driving this country into the worst places possible while potentially, allegedly helping his wife make a lot more money. Like, they're all super rich. They go in there not rich. They come out unbelievably wealthy because they're allowed to do insider trading, essentially, allegedly.
Okay, yay.
Hey,
At least nobody thought that the original portrait of his Nazi salute was worth anything.
Yeah, I'm sure you could have found, if there were people who knew about it, I'm sure you could find someone who would have spent like $10.
But they didn't.
Yeah.
I mean, auction houses say this is what we're going to be selling. And nobody wanted that. The end.
Well, thank you, everyone.
All the sources are going to be in the description. So if you want to look into anything for yourself, hope you enjoyed this episode. We're going to try and have them more often again. We will continue to say that every time. Yeah, well, life is always stressful. Yes. And my executive function is not always the greatest.
But hey, These are fun to do, and thank you everyone for watching, for listening, for not watching, because, I mean, the YouTube video is just some pictures. But yeah, thank you all so much, and thank you for all your hard work, Amanda.
You're welcome. Bye.
Bye.